We live in a world of acronyms. So what are they and why do you even care? I'm Brandy with the Come Home team at Better Homes and Gardens, and I've got a tip for you if you are selling your house. Now, last month we went through each section of the exclusive right to sell for residential. If you didn't see it, check the link below. You can go to another site and take a look at all of them. Today, I am going to share with you the SPD. That is the seller's property disclosure. So what exactly is the seller's property disclosure? Why do you need it? And is it even required? There are conversations about whether or not a seller is required to provide a potential buyer the seller's property disclosure. And in fact, there is a section in the real estate contract offer where the buyer can even waive the right to receive one. We'll talk about those details when we go through the real estate contract, but let's get to the seller's property disclosure and I'll give you an idea of what it's all about. Okay, so first things first, the seller's property disclosure must be completed by the seller. So that means that the seller's realtor may not complete it for you. The first section at the very top of page 1 is very straightforward. It has a serial number, which we talked about with the listing agreement, and section 1 of page 1 is where the seller will input the street address, city, state, zip code, and county. Next on page 1, it talks about the purpose of this statement. And essentially, the purpose is to provide a potential buyer information that the seller knows about the property. Now, unless it is specified, it is understood that the seller is not an expert in construction and does not have any information available to provide to the buyer pertaining the construction of the home. The next part is the instructions for you as the seller on how you fill this out. You complete it yourself. You advise the potential buyer any information that you know about the house. And if some of the items don't apply to this property, then you just say not applicable. Or if you don't know the answer to the question, then you say unknown. But you must answer every question on this form. Okay, so page 2 is pretty important. Page 2 is where you as the seller will complete the questions about the service providers to the property. Service providers such as water, natural gas, if it's propane, who provides the electricity, sewer, cable, etc. Everything that you know that you can share with these buyers. And that includes who your current homeowner's insurance is, who holds the termite policy if you have one, and maybe even the school district that this property is located in. Page 3 goes on to talk about the community amenities that are available for this property. So if there's an HOA, what is it? How much is it? How often is it paid? What does it cover? Is it cover a community pool? Is it a community boat dock? Things like that. The next 4 to 5 pages are going to be questions the seller will answer that is specific to the property. And the very first question is actually pretty important, which is, does this seller hold a real estate license? Now, as a licensed agent, you are required to disclose to any buyers that you are in fact the owner of the property and also hold a real estate license. Now, remember earlier I talked about the instructions for the seller, and I said if it's not applicable to the property, then you select NA. And if you're not sure about the question, then you would select unknown. Now, there are 49 questions for you as the seller to answer about your property, and when you get to the bottom of them, if you've answered yes to any of those questions, this section gives you a space where you can provide more details about why you answered yes to that question. And once you've gone through all of the questions and you've provided any further details, if you answered yes, at the very bottom of page 10, you will sign and date the seller's property disclosure. Now, Section 3 is new this year, and basically what it says is that if the seller's property disclosure was done more than 10 days prior to the accepted contract, then the seller will go back and notify the potential buyer if there have been any changes with the property, and they will do that within 3 days of when the signed contract was completed. And finally, Section 4, this is what you're going to be looking at just before closing. In fact, 3 business days prior to closing, you as the seller will notify the buyer if anything has changed since the last time they looked at the seller's property disclosure. And again, you as the seller will sign and date, and so will the buyer. And this completes the seller's property disclosure process. Now, like I said in the beginning, there have been conversations as to whether or not the seller's property disclosure is required. And really what it boils down to is, what does the contract request? Now, there have been cases, and many times actually, where the seller has not lived in the property. Maybe it's an investment property for them. And so they may actually identify the fact that they have not lived in the property, and so they're unable to complete a seller's property disclosure. Well, that completes the explanation of the seller's property disclosure. We did it in one session, so that's great. Come back next week and we'll talk about the next contract.